Happy Sabbath, church family. We'll give everybody just a moment to find the link. I know that several people have said that when we start right away between segments like this, we end up having people miss several minutes sometimes trying to find the new link. So while we wait for people to join in, I'll share a conversation that Dan and Jenny and I had yesterday. We're going to see if we can bring some high-tech tools online between now and next Sabbath's worship. We really don't know how long it will be that we'll be live streaming from our homes instead of from our church. Hopefully that won't be many weeks longer, but we'll see. In the meantime, though, we're going to attempt to unify our live stream into one single live stream so that it isn't necessary to paw around on the Facebook page trying to find the next installment. We're going to try, I think it'll be Wednesday, probably Wednesday evening. We'll announce that more on the Facebook page and by email between now and then, but we're going to try to have a midweek service of some kind that has several segments, and we'll try to use some of the new live streaming tools to see if we can produce this in a single event, like a competent church studio. Well, we hope this is only temporary, and soon we'll be back in our sanctuary with our own experts that do an excellent job during regular Sabbaths doing the live stream with all of our cameras and all of the software and all of the tools, and with all of you there to join us, as many as are local and can make it. We have a strange Sabbath. We're in the middle of this lockdown in our homes, and it's not like any Easter that I can remember in my whole life. I've never not been able to go out and go to worship services if I chose to, and I think that's probably true for some of you. Even if you're many years older than me, you've probably never lived through something like this. And it's when I woke up this morning and thought about the way that Sabbath more than 2,000 years ago was, I say in quotes, celebrated. It was probably the darkest Sabbath for one group of people that had all of their plans, all of their hopes for how they thought life was going to go entirely interrupted the day before. And they didn't know the next day was Easter. Maybe they should have known from what Jesus said, but there was a profound reluctance, a refusal even to accept what Jesus said when he told them that he would rise on the third day. And so they were wondering if they had invested their entire lives, walked away from whatever they had going on before they followed Jesus, and now had spent these 3 years maybe disillusioned. And here we are in our homes, many of us not knowing what life will look like after we're out of our homes again. We don't know what we're going to find. People have had their jobs impacted, their finances, their housing, certainly their social lives. Things are not likely to return to exactly how they were. And right now, all we have is patience and faith to see what things will be like on the other side of this. Today's weather cooperated. When I looked outside, it was gray and foggy, and the mood was perfect to take us in our minds, in our imagination, to set it up to go back to that day before the first Easter. But today, I want to ask, can Easter be canceled? Can we cancel Easter? The Washington Examiner's March 20 headline read, "Easter and Passover canceled. Coronavirus pandemic upends ancient traditions." And Easter is canceled is the name of the 6th studio album by British hard rock band The Darkness, and that was released just 190 days ago on October 4, 2019. But there's no consensus. According to the Vatican's March 25 statement, Easter liturgies cannot be canceled. Holy Week liturgies are celebrated in the cathedral and in parish churches. The faithful should be advised of the times for the celebrations so they can pray at home at the same time. Live, but not recorded, televisual or internet broadcasts are helpful, the decree said. Well, I'm not particularly concerned with newspaper pronouncements or rock band album cover prophecies or papal decrees, but I am fascinated by profound worldwide disruption. Things, as we said, probably will not go back to exactly as they were, and that's absolutely okay. It's okay. Not everything was perfect the way it was before. We have a tendency to be afraid of things changing, even though, if we were honest, we would look back and see that changes, as often as not, make things better. It's still scary because we become used to things, even if they're bad things. But that's the way history has always unfolded. The world does not stay the same. History moves right along, and we're certainly part of that history. Still, this worldwide disruption is dwarfed by the disruption celebrated each year at this time, when one man was executed, like countless forgettables throughout the Roman Empire. It could not have seemed the least bit likely to reshape human civilization and to stand out as arguably the single most significant event in the entire historic record. And it's not hard at all to think of some characters who would have loved to cancel that first Easter. Not hard at all. Let's look together at Matthew chapter 28, verses 11 through 15. This is the report of the guards. While the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And let's go a little further back in the story to Jesus' trials before Pilate and Herod. This is found in Matthew 27, verses 11 through 31, Mark 15, 2 to 19, Luke 21, 1 to 25, and John 18, 28 through 19, chapter 19, verse 16. And I'm going to go back and forth between the New Living Translation, Revised Standard Version, and the Message paraphrase. So here we go. Jesus was placed before Pilate, the Roman governor, who asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." But when the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. "Don't you hear all the charges they bring against you?" Pilate demanded. Jesus was silent, much to the governor's surprise. Pilate turned to the priests and the crowd and said, "I find nothing wrong with this man." They became insistent. "But he is causing riots by his teaching wherever he goes, all over Judea, from Galilee to Jerusalem." "Oh, is he a Galilean?" Pilate asked. When they said that he was, Pilate gladly sent him to Herod Antipas, because Galilee was under Herod's jurisdiction, and Herod happened to be in Jerusalem at the time. And Herod was delighted for the opportunity to see Jesus, because he'd heard about him and he'd been hoping for a long time to see him perform a miracle. He asked Jesus question after question, but Jesus refused to answer. Meanwhile, the leading priests and teachers of religious law stood there shouting accusations. Herod and his soldiers mocked and ridiculed Jesus. They put a royal robe on him and just sent him right back to Pilate. Then Pilate called together all the chief leading priests and chief teachers of Jewish religious law, and all the people again, and announced his verdict in terms of his examination of Jesus. He said, "You brought me this man, accusing him of leading a revolt. I examined thoroughly, and I find him innocent. Herod reached the same conclusion and sent him back to us. Nothing this man has done calls for the death penalty, so I'll just have him flogged and release him." Well, it was the governor's custom each year during Passover celebration to release one prisoner to the crowd, anyone they wanted. This year there was a notorious prisoner named Barabbas. As crowds gathered before Pilate's house that morning, he asked them, "Which one do you want me to release, Barabbas or Jesus, who was called the Messiah?" And he knew very well that the religious leaders had arrested Jesus out of envy. Just then, as Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him this chilling message: "You need to leave this innocent man alone. I suffered through a terrible nightmare about him last night." Meanwhile, the leading priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas' release and Jesus' execution. So Pilate asked again, "Which of these two do you want me to release to you?" The crowd shouted back, "Barabbas." Pilate responded, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" But the mob roared even louder, "Crucify him!" Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere and that a riot was even developing. So he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood." Let's be real clear. This is on you. And all the people yelled back, "We take full responsibility for his death. His blood be upon us and our children." So Pilate released Barabbas and ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to Roman soldiers to be crucified. Are there some folks in that part of the story who really, really would have liked to have canceled the first Easter? Well, too bad for those folks. Definitely no luck canceling that first Easter. Even though Easter observance seemed to be dimmed down this year. This year's Lent is Lent on steroids. This year's Lent is the land of the giants kind of Lenten season. Going without things we quite would rather not go without this year before Easter? Absolutely. Everyone's observing a great big sort of Lent, even folks who have no idea what Lent even is. Beyond, I picked the worst month ever to have Lent. Lent, you my video game console. You're probably aware of the religious practice of observing Lent. This year, Lent began February 26. Lent always begins on what's known as Ash Wednesday. In the Christian tradition, for countless years, people have used ashes from burning the palm fronds from the Palm Sunday celebration from the previous year, and people go to have their priest dip his finger in some of those ashes and make a cross on their forehead. Maybe some of you have seen people in the community on Ash Wednesday with an ashen cross that they leave on their head the rest of the day. Anyway, Lent began February 26th this year, and it ends 46 days later as Easter begins. It's 40 days of fasting or giving up, going without something that is chosen to be sacrificed during this time. And it's not 46 days, just 40 days, because Sundays are skipped. Those are not considered fast days, so it adds up to 40. So today, day 46 of the Lenten season, and day 40 of the Lenten fast is the last day of Lent this year. Lent, it's a late 14th century Middle English abbreviation of Lenten from the Old English word Lengten. Springtime or spring is what Lengten means, Lencten, springtime. The season from the West Germanic word langetanaz, long days or lengthening of the days. This prehistoric compound probably refers to increasing daylight in the spring and is reconstructed from langes, which means long, and taina, which means day. Lent in the Christian church is a period of penitential preparation for Easter. In Western churches, as we said, begins on Ashen Wednesday, 6.5 weeks before Easter, and provides for that 40-day fast. And it is supposed to be an imitation of Jesus Christ's fasting in the wilderness before he began his public ministry. In Eastern churches, though, Lent begins on the Monday of the 7th week before Easter and ends on Friday, that is 9 days before Easter. And they actually they include Saturdays as well as Sundays in relaxing their fast days, so they don't count Saturdays or Sundays in adding up to the 40 days. When I was a young guy, a really young boy, I did not live in a particularly religious home, and we did not know anything about Lent, but I remember my Catholic friends from our neighborhood telling me that what it is that they'd chosen to give up for Lent, whether it was candy or it was some TV program that they watched every day or something. There was a number of things. Somebody gave up cake, and they were kid things that they gave up, playing a certain game, baseball, whatever. Well, this Lent we've been in has been one of the most revealing Lents of our lives. We as Seventh-day Adventists haven't really thought about Lent. In fact, I'd say until 10 years ago, I don't think I heard anybody within the Seventh-day Adventist Fellowship that said, I think I'll give up something for Lent. I have noticed some people doing that in the last few years. It's not a bad thing to do, but it's certainly not something that has for long been part of the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. But whether we like it or not, whether we've ever celebrated it, we've been kind of celebrating it recently, this year. What would happen if we compared our mandated pandemic shelter-at-home experience this month with Lent? Not imitation Lent, not the Lent that Christians celebrate imitating the real Lent, but the actual Lent, the genuine original event which is imitated in each year's observance. Well, Matthew 4 verses 1 to 14 tells us about the real Lent. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, turn these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city, and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." And that was taken from Psalm 91. Jesus was quoting from Psalm 91. We can find that in verses 11 and 12. Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." And Jesus there was quoting Deuteronomy 6, verse 16. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this will I give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." And that's from Deuteronomy 6:13. Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. Now, how does our experience these past few weeks compare to that experience? Well, we are home, and Jesus was out in the desert. He certainly was not home. I'd say we're probably quite a bit more comfortable. And while staying home, we have food and water. Jesus absolutely fasted for 40 days and 40 nights straight. He didn't take Saturdays and Sundays off, I don't think. And Jesus refused to provide for himself using his abilities to obtain food when he was famished after fasting. Many of us, though, try to obtain as much extra food and other provisions as we're even able to, trying to hoard more than a week's worth if we manage to get it to it before others have a chance to deprive us by doing the same. And we're concerned about our toilet paper inventory. Like, that's the thing that was our go-to worry. And how likely is it that Jesus carried with him into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights an adequate supply of toilet paper? Think about that. This was a real person with a real body going into the desert. I don't know if he really had a trailer he was pulling behind his pickup. Probably not. Some people have been saying that they trust God to take care of them while they neglect safety precautions laid down by our public health officials that are trying to keep us safe and try to keep people from spreading this virus and causing more deaths. You know, that doesn't seem completely dissimilar to me from what we read in Matthew 4, verses 5 and 6. Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It's also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." I have actually heard people saying in the last month that they know that they have enough faith that they will be protected by God. And so they have gone out, and that some people are still holding their church services in person in different parts of the country, as if they're daring to be a Daniel standing up for what they believe is right. You know, that's not entirely dissimilar, I don't think, from being tempted to just say, well, I'm promised to have myself taken care of, so I'll just do foolish, dangerous things like jumping off of here because I know I'm promised that the Lord will protect me. Not entirely dissimilar. Well, and Jesus refused worldly success. This is the biggest one, because this hits us where we are part of our culture the most. Instead, Jesus chose faithfulness and holiness. He chose to follow the kind of path that we think of as God's way of living in this world. It's the way he demonstrated when God came to this world. Matthew 4, 8-10, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this will I give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." And you know, worship is not really just a matter of what we do when we face the same direction sitting in a religious building once a week. Worship is something where we show through our lives, not just in our rituals, but in our lives, we show what's worth to us, what are our values. What we worship is what we value. Most of us, on the other hand, when it comes right down to it, we, at least part of us, to one degree or another, depending on where we are in our walk with our Savior, we identify more closely with many of the underlying values of this world than some of the bizarre, inconvenient, untenable values that Jesus preached and demonstrated. And that is sensible for us to do that. It is. I'm not saying that we're ridiculous for doing things that make good sense in our culture. It makes perfect sense. It's far more practical to get along adequately within our culture than to adopt all of Jesus' upsetting, upending, upside-down values. And his values really don't fit very well into our world. They don't. To our credit, we do take certain stands. We do observe certain practices which make us a bit different than most of the people in the world around us. Many of us, I pray that it's still most of us in the Adventist realm, avoid alcohol and some of the foods prohibited in Leviticus 11. And we go to church on Saturday instead of Sunday. And that's a big deal for us. And there's a few other things. We might carefully avoid using selected vocabulary words that we happen to associate with dialects spoken by society's less fortunate people from lower socioeconomic classes. That certainly sounds real Christ-like, doesn't it? I'm winking. In case you can't see me, I'm winking when I say that. No, it doesn't. Many of us tithe, and we might even be conscientious enough to tithe the mint and the dill and the cumin. Matthew 23:23, Jesus said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law." Now, the mint and the dill and the cumin, some commentators have said, those are herbs that in many cases are voluntary. I know my grandmother had mint that grew in her garden like it was a weed. She started a little bit of it, and then you'd have trouble killing it. It showed up everywhere. She'd go out and gather it and clean it and put mint on a big mixture of different kinds of melon in a nice big bowl. Tasted so good to have that mint on those melons. But they were voluntary. And I don't know, we might not take it to that extent, things that are kind of accidental benefits. We might tithe our accidental benefits, little tips and gratuities or things that we get. I don't know. But you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, Jesus said, justice and mercy and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. I believe that those three things that are mentioned are not just random examples of just good stuff. I believe that justice, mercy, and faith, in that order, are stages of spiritual development. The neglected weightier matters refers to neglecting perhaps the journey of spiritual development, holding fast instead, some of us, to aspects of spiritual immaturity, as if immaturity was a virtue. And all those who mature beyond early sort of infantile stages of spirituality are heretics who abandon that old-time religion from back when everything was just swell. Well, justice as a spiritual developmental phase, as one stop, one area that we pass through on our journey from being entirely like people who are unapologetically selfish and who proclaim that their job is to get ahead of others and to crush anyone that gets in their way. People that they think whoever can get the most and get it the soonest and beat out the most people. Those values are inseparable from our culture here in this country and in many countries in the world. To some extent, every country, but it's more concentrated in some places where it's celebrated. Well, for some people, they're so selfish and primitive in how they live with other people in community that it's progress for them to get to a stage of even rudimentary primitive justice. In Exodus chapter 21, verses 23 to 24, we see the following. If there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Now, it's hard for us when we see this eye for an eye, tit for tat kind of retribution when somebody does something that we perceive harms us or costs us, or people we consider in our family or company or whatever. And so we look back at some of the things that God has instructed people earlier in the written history of God's dealings with His people, and it appears kind of shocking sometimes, because many of us have actually been taught better than that, better than eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You've probably, almost everyone hearing my voice has heard the quote, eye for an eye, and pretty soon the whole world goes blind. That's attributed to Gandhi saying that, and it's true. When you start exacting what you consider fair, then the previous person who served up whatever dirty deed hurt you and that you felt a need to retaliate for, they felt like they were justified in doing what they did. So when you retaliate, they feel like now they need to retaliate because they think you're one up, and we kind of think that we're responding evenly, but we're responding sometimes somebody offends me, so I kill them. It was actually progress when people would feel offended and then just wipe out somebody's whole family to maintain their honor, or let everybody know not to fool with me, because I'm me. You don't fool with me. You say some insult to my daughter, and so I come and I annihilate your whole household and burn your house down. Well, it would be progress if we could restrain people like that to saying, look, well, what did they actually do to you? Okay, well, let's just do something back to them. They called you a bad name? Fine, you call them a bad name. Did they hit you and they broke your nose? All right, let's break their nose. And then leave it at that. It's over. So that was progress. If there's serious injury, you're to take life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. But I don't think that's where God would have any of us to stop. And when people keep quoting that now, justified that God is asking them to find justice, they are misinterpreting Scripture. They're not looking at the bigger picture, and it's a perversion. We want to move on from justice to mercy. Now, there's lots of incremental stages, just thousands of little steps in between. But these three main categories of spiritual development. Yes, we could have a finer tooth comb to comb through this kind of development, but just three major waypoints. The next is mercy. Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And on that same note, Jesus said in Matthew 5, we find this starting with verse 38, you have heard it said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Don't even resist. Certainly don't take measured revenge. Don't even resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Well, I mean, Jesus is basically saying, let's just forget our self-interest. If somebody is trying to get something out of you, just give it to them. Well, now we've gone past where that works out smoothly in our culture. It doesn't. And we can't even manage that as a church, as a denomination. We can't manage it. If somebody comes in and harms our organization, then they're going to get sued. If they use our name to say something or to hold meetings or something. We're going to have a trademark infringement suit because it just isn't workable in our culture. It's not workable for us. We can't smoothly keep going along if we're going to follow Jesus' disruptive way of doing things. We can talk about how, well, we have to take what Jesus said with a grain of salt, or we have to update it or anything. No. The world he was in was really, really similar to the world that we're in today in terms of the values in the Roman Empire and the values, especially in the United States and other European cultured kinds of places. So that's not the last stop. That's not where we're called to stop. It's not just move from annihilating everybody who looks at you crosswise and then progress to justice, and then later on progress to mercy. It goes beyond that. I don't know if many of us in this life will go beyond that, but I think that there was a third thing mentioned here, and that was faith. The life of faith goes beyond just a life of mercy and of letting people off the hook and even being compassionate. Matthew 17:20, he replied, "Because you have so little faith, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible to you." Now, if nothing is impossible to you, we can move from being people who, if we have something that we've worked hard to get, somebody else wants it and we just selflessly give it to them. At the next step, we realize that the resources are not actually finite. If somebody takes something, fine. We're talking about a Savior who demonstrated that when you have thousands of people that are hungry, you can feed the whole group out of one lunch pail. One boy's lunch pail, you can feed the whole group. I'm not there. I'd love to be able to conduct potlucks like that. And sometimes I actually suspect when I see how much is left over when we're looking at the number of people that stay for potluck at our church. Sometimes I think there's some people in our fellowship who are there. Well, it isn't me, but I see sometimes more people and more appetites than I see food, and then we end up with as much left over as what we started, it seems like. I don't know how it works, but maybe that's because there's somebody there who has moved to that level. I'm not ruling it out. Luke 17, verse 6. He replied, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it'll obey you." Was Jesus just somebody who talked nonsense, or do you think that this is actually real? Or do you think it's something that makes you just kind of look at the Bible as some silly, quaint thing like a children's fairy tale book? Do you think he said it? Do you believe it? Does it seem to you that this universe is the kind of place where that kind of thing that seems like magic, is actually possible? Probably not. Probably most of us, if we were honest, if we were painfully honest, the kind of honest where we'd have to go to court and they were going to tell us they were going to give us a polygraph and we'd be in trouble if we failed it. I think probably most of us have really more actual confidence in the kind of physics that you learn in high school. I think that common people's understanding of science kind of rules out the things that Jesus claimed and the things that it is claimed that Jesus did. And that's one step, because being in a more primitive frame of mind, we might believe in stupid kinds of magic. We might be gullible to things that are just, they're not real, and there's no reason to have any faith in them. They're just stupid. We move past that to being sensible, and it is progress, and it's even spiritual progress. But we come to a point where there's this thing called faith, and things happen that is really, really hard for a physicist to, or any skeptic, somebody who fits perfectly in our culture today, to accept. And I don't know how many of us that are hearing this today really do have confidence like that. I fear that sometimes when we think we do, when we think we have faith, we might actually be further behind in our spiritual development than we were as skeptics, because we regress to sort of a childish, not childlike, but childish, gullible faith, where somebody could come along with wizardry and fool us with a bunch of nonsense, a bunch of sleight of hand tricks. There have been religious figures, media figures that have hidden little earpieces and had people that feed information to them while they stand in front of a crowd in an auditorium or a tent or a church building, and they give information that people got from registration information or from actually detective work to find private stuff about people, so that they can, and they work these tricks. They trick people into believing that they have magic. And we don't want to be that kind of gullible. We don't want to be stupid. We want to move on to the kind of faith where things really do happen. We don't want to be described in 2 Timothy 3:5. What does it say there? Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such, turn away. You know, it's probably not good to follow after people who just have a formal religion. They have a form of godliness. Their religion is formal, but it's impotent. It's powerless. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't make any difference in this world. It doesn't make any difference in our lives. Things always continue to follow regular old expectations that are smooth in our culture. But we got some formality going when we get together and do our religious thing. No. That's not worth the investment. That's a waste. Let's look at that same passage, 2 Timothy 3:5, in the New Living Translation. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Stay away from people like that. Good advice. Well, consequently, at the end of the day, we do share the world's values about some of the weightier matters of the law. Matters where the law gets written on our hearts, on the hearts of maturing saints. The more grown-up laws Jesus explained when he said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. The commandments that Jesus expressly identified. John 15:2-14. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. Matthew 22, verse 35-40. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him on this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Mark chapter 12, starting with verse 28, says, one of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he said, of all the commandments, which is the most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. Luke 10:22, he answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Hebrews 10, chapter 16, this is the new covenant I will make with my people after those days, says the Lord. I will put my laws on their hearts and write them on their minds. I will put my laws on their hearts and write them on their minds. Imagine yourself going for a routine physical. You go to the doctor's office and you're just having lab work and going to listen and make sure your heart sounds okay and get you weighed and all of that. And you're left waiting for a long time in the waiting room. And so you're already sitting on that exam table, and you can feel that, and you can hear that the hygienic paper underneath you, and you're sitting there with a little backless gown in your shorts, and you're kind of tired, and you just lay back on that exam table and cover yourself up carefully with that thing, and before you know it, you've dozed off. Not hard to imagine. And you barely even stir when the nurse gently takes your wrist to check your pulse. You didn't even notice the nurse coming in. Then you hear the nurse who's taking your vitals calling a code in a flash. You're experiencing medical personnel performing every conceivable resuscitation procedure, then pausing and checking your pulse after doing things that hurt like crazy and that really shouldn't have been done. They take your pulse again after this whole code blue protocol, and they say, after feeling your wrist, "Hey, welcome back." They say, you died on the table. Everyone comes and expresses how grateful they are that they were able to revive you. But you hadn't died. You were there. Your heart was beating. It was just they weren't checking your pulse correctly. They didn't feel it because they weren't feeling for it right. You hadn't died. You just dozed off. Nevertheless, they proceed to continue your treatment because, man, after that, you need some serious treatment. So they strap you down and they cart you off to intensive care, and they discuss all the tests that they have to run and all the lifestyle changes you must learn to live with now that you've had this episode. And they discuss whether or not you'll ever be able to return to your job and your active hobbies, and they tell you probably not. Things are going to be really changed. But you weren't revived. It was a big farce. Without Crucifixion Friday, Resurrection Sunday would be absurd. Without death, an empty tomb means, well, it means not much at all. Not much at all. It would be ridiculous to celebrate resurrection if there'd been no death. We read, "I am crucified with Christ." Really? Am I? Am I really crucified with Christ? Mark 8, verse 34, "Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, 'If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it.'" Matthew 10, verse 34, "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me isn't worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me isn't worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me isn't worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." Matthew 16, verse 24. Then Jesus says to his disciples, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Matthew 16, verses 24 to 26 in the NIV. That previous one was in the New American Standard, the last reading. This is from the NIV, the same verses. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciples must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life," that the Greek word there for life could mean either life or soul, "will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" Luke 14:27, "And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, "This person began to build but wasn't able to finish." Now, that's us, maybe, if we start this spiritual development process and we get to a certain stage and kind of run out of gas, run out of resources, run out of willingness. I think Jesus is saying, recognize that if you're going to go very far into this, instead of just stalling out and just saying, "Hey, that was a phase I went through," or "Hey, I'm good at this level," if we're going to take it all the way, if we're going to be serious and get to the point where we don't just have a form of godliness, but we experience the power that Jesus spoke of, because we're starting to walk into the realm of faith. We're starting to develop to the point where we see results that are kind of scary even. But that's at a cost. And we're going to think about that going in. Jesus encouraged people, be serious about this. I'm asking you to have something very special, but you got to give up something that's very comfortable. And our lifestyle and our culture that we're afraid might be threatened just by having a few weeks where we get out of sync as an economy, as an economic people. We're saying, is this it? Am I going to just end up completely destroyed? Is the food chain fouled up now? Or I'm not going to be able to get things like I have been and going to Safeway? No, we're not going to be able to get produce out of season anymore from the southern hemisphere, that was picked yesterday, coming in on an airplane. Is this all gone now? Without disrupting the whole world, we would find ourselves disrupted in how we can cooperate with the world by some of the things, some of the values that are very different in following Jesus, really clear into the realm of faith. For if you lay a foundation, you're not able to finish it. Everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, "This person began to build and wasn't able to finish." Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he's able with 10,000 men to oppose one coming against him with 20,000? And if he's not able, he'll send a delegation while the other is still a long ways off and will seek terms of peace. Say, "I'm not going to be able to do this. We better negotiate." Well, some of us, that's realistic. If we don't have the stomach for it, we might say, that looks like something I'd like to do. I'd like to conquer that aspect of myself, but I'm not the kind of person who can swim upstream in my culture that well. It's just too powerful for me. And Jesus said, be realistic about this. Now, I'm not saying if we decide, I'm kind of just going to be formal and cultural, that we're going to end up going to hell, that John 3:16 isn't for us. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think, though, what we're losing is not heaven eventually, necessarily, but I think what we're losing is being able to have heaven around us and in us now, while we're on earth, while having heaven just streams of heavenly healing flowing from us and out of our homes and out of our church. The blessing that's lost now, the blessing that could be blessing those in our community that could be impacted, even people that'll never follow along with us, still having the suffering reduced and the joy increased from bizarre people who will step out in faith. It makes a big difference. But I'm not saying you better do this or you're going to go to hell when you die. No, I don't think so. If he's not able, he'll send a delegation while the other is still a long ways off and seek terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Man, there were lots of people who Jesus contacted that did not end up following him around the countryside and turning into apostles, changing the world. No. That doesn't mean they're not going to be saved. But the blessing that was lost and the opportunity to be instruments of changing the world that was missed. Too bad. John 12, verses 23 and following, Jesus replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who loves their life will lose it." And that loving is a manner, I think, of clinging to. Anyone who clings to their life, the very life they're clinging to, is in jeopardy. Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. And by hate, we need to remember that this is English that we're reading, which was translated from Greek. And perhaps the story was even written in Greek, but Jesus probably wasn't speaking Greek when he said this. And in all of those translations, the concept is hard to carry along. We're talking about folk who have a tendency to have a lot fewer words than we do in Greek or in English. We have very precise words, and it allows us to express a real continuum of emotional regard or disregard. There are some languages where you either like something or you don't, and there's not 90 different degrees in between. So when you say to us, "I hate that. I really hate that," now we mean we really don't like it. We really detest it. But when it's a matter of a language where when you really make something the first priority and everything else is something that, hey, I'm sorry, it's just not the first priority. If I say, hey, I love my wife, but if I was forced to say, the way I love my life, I don't love other people, what if my language didn't have all the words to describe how I love those people too? If saying the word love meant that I was giving affection to people that really only belong to my wife, that would be a challenge. Fortunately for us, though, in English, there's just all kinds of words I can use to say how I feel about others that I certainly don't detest and loathe. But we need to remember that what we're saying here is, I'm going to leave that old life and look for a new life. There are things that are even hateful about that old life. When you think about the wake that we leave behind us and the people that have been hurt or just not blessed as we've gathered to ourselves what we need for us and ours, it kind of makes us feel kind of sick, doesn't it? Can't you think of people you've hurt to get what you need? Yeah, well justified. And, we're in competition. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and sorry, they lost, But when we think about it, it makes us a little bit sad. And I'm willing to say I do hate the things I remember doing, trying to just make sure I'm all set. And then going, yeah, well, he's not set, she's not set. Yeah. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there heard it, and they said that it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Without Crucifixion Friday, Resurrection Sunday is just absurd. Without death, an empty tomb means nothing much at all. It's ridiculous to celebrate resurrection if there's been no death. Am I crucified with Christ? Am I? Am I really? If I really have been, what does that actually look like in my life? How am I not like every other selfish soul in this world's get-ahead treadmill kind of rat race? How is it any different, me, because I've been, whatever that means, crucified with Christ? Am I crucified with Christ? Am I? To what degree? Am I halfway crucified with him, or 25%? Can I be raised to new life if I've never actually taken up my cross and followed him to the hill? Have I ever taken up my cross and started that road to crucifixion, and then I got tired out and I set it down, lost focus, and kind of blended into the crowd and went on my way? Have I done that? Am I crucified with Christ? Have I died to self? If so, how much? Is there more self in me that could be yielded so that it truly is nevertheless not I, but Christ who lives in me? If so, if it's maybe the case that there's still some of me alive and well in here, some of the part of me that should have been crucified with Christ, would I be willing to let God root that out and see that crucified too? To what degree is it true that you and I are crucified with Christ, such that nevertheless we don't live, but Christ lives in us? I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. No, let's not cancel Easter. Let's not cancel it, but if necessary, do we need to postpone part of it in each of our personal lives? Do we need to say, there's going to be a lot bigger Easter resurrection once I have an actual Calvary in laying down that part of myself? Well, and as a church family, it's not like regular Easter Sabbath now. We're not able to be together, and so what I want to do is promise you that when we can be together, when this stay-at-home order is in the rearview mirror, let's not say, well, we passed over Easter. I don't care if it ends up too late in the season, if it's even closer to summer. Let's still have an Easter Sabbath, and let's promise each other that between now and then, as this kind of Lent season protracts, more weeks, that we'll be preparing for a different kind of resurrection celebration than we've had in years past. Be grateful, even though this is a trial and even though this is a tragedy, Be grateful for some of the benefits that might come out of this, because we're told that we can rejoice even in our trials. Galatians 2:20. Could this be your prayer today? I'll read it through. Then I'll invite you to pray it with me if you'd believe that it's appropriate for you. Here's what I'm going to pray. See if you'd be willing to pray it in your heart. Please, Lord, would you make me willing to be crucified with Christ, so that although I'm still alive, it can be not I, but Christ living in me, so that the life which I live in this body from now on, I can live more than ever by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Now, as a prayer, let's bow our heads and say it in our hearts if it's appropriate. Please, Lord, would you make me willing to be crucified with Christ, so that although I'm still alive, it can be not I, but Christ living in me, so that the life which I live in this body from now on, I can live more than ever by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. God bless you. I so look forward to seeing you face to face, and not just in Zoom calls and on your Facebook posts. It'll be good when we can shake hands and have a hug in the lobby at the church, when I can look out from the platform and see you there holding hymnals and we can sing together. I look forward to that, and we'll celebrate Easter together when that time comes. In the meantime, let's stay in touch here on this Facebook page, and you can follow also the playlists in YouTube. We'll be seeing you several times, or you'll be seeing us several times this week. May God bless you.